Good morning, guys. This is my first time doing like a daytime show on my channel because I typically work construction during the
Oh,
day.
but daytime television is the worst.
So I
Thanks
I
for
wanted
putting
to
us
get
in the daytime television slot, Anthony.
I wanted to well, the thing is I have a little energy in a daytime slot. Like typically I worked all day and then we do the 8 p.m. and I'm exhausted. I usually ask Michael after he just did his show. So he's on like his fourth hour of streaming as he comes into ours, the poor guy. So, but I thought the three of us would be a good combination because first we spent a significant portion of time together at the Catholic Identity Conference last year. And you got Mark, when I first started talking to Mark, he had told me that you guys were actually friends long before either of
Oh
you
yeah.
met me. So how do you guys know each other?
Uh, Traveling in similar circles, really. We met through various acquaintances and met at certain gatherings, and it was we just hit it off. So
Yeah, this is so I figured when we went to that conference, Michael and Mark were basically my wingmen. So Mark flew in and he was jet lagged and had slept about 2 hours, and the guy stayed up until like 2 a.m. with us, just drinking pints and like just getting into conversations and talking. And it
The
was
English way.
yeah, it was really fun because I think Mark had some preconceived opinions of me that when we actually got to talking about things, he was like, "Oh, okay, you're not really just like some crazy rad trad. You actually have some nuanced opinions on some things." But we're coming up on the Catholic Super Bowl, essentially, right? We have a conclave happening, which this is the third of my life. I wasn't alive for John Paul's election, but I was for oh no, this will be my third. So Benedict's election, Francis's election, and now this one. And there's a lot of people that are saying you shouldn't be talking about this stuff yet, and you're just doing it for clicks. But I also think there's a lot of new people that came into the church that have never experienced the conclave, and it is something exciting as a Catholic to experience. So I wanted to just go over with you guys maybe what it's been like being a Catholic, being Catholic our whole lives and witnessing some of the changes we've gone through over the years. And then we'll get into what some of the options are out there and what we think is going to happen regardless of who's elected. So let's just go back to like the early days. Like, were you guys? Oh, because I grew up in I'm a cradle Catholic, but didn't take my faith seriously until my 20s. Like, were were you guys heavily invested in the John Paul II pontificate?
not really. I mean, I liked John Paul, and I definitely appreciated his documents with regard to orthodoxy and specifically with the pro life movement. But uh, growing up, I saw some of the other things too. You know, I saw both sides. I saw the glorious stuff that he put out, and then I saw kind of the seedy underbelly. You know, when he would go to these Assisi blessings, for instance, where he met with a bunch of interfaith groups and leaders, and they were all called to pray in their own way at the Church of Assisi, and it was it was a confusing time in some respects. I kept waiting for him to do something like, drop the hammer on a bunch of heretics and kick him out of the church and say, you know what, enough of this. Stop messing with the mass. Stop monkeying with this. Stop changing church teaching, and stop trying to promulgate heresy. But he didn't excommunicate anybody except for Marcel Lefebvre. So I didn't have any animosity towards Pope John Paul II. I actually, like I said, I really liked him, but I wasn't, like part of the JP2 generation kind of thing. I wasn't going to go to those youth day, what was it, World Youth Day and that kind of thing. I wasn't going to be part of the big party. It just wasn't my scene.
That's interesting. Okay, so Mark, I think you probably didn't have, because I think Michael was a little more like cued into these things before, definitely way before I was. So I don't hear about Assisi until 2017. So Mark, were you one of the part of the generation that was like the man's a living saint?
I don't know about that. I don't know that I was that. I was a cradle Catholic, and I didn't have any formation in my faith, really, you know. So he was the Pope, and he was a bit of a rock star. When he came to England, I went to Wembley. I was only a little fella. My wife was there as well. You know, we must have been 11 or 12 or something like that, you know. I didn't know her at the time, but, you know, it was a massive celebration of what it meant to be Catholic. So from all that side of things, I was completely thought the man was brilliant, and he's down of communism. Then I discovered the history of his life and everything, he losing his family, and you know, the difficult circumstances. Then I discovered his philosophical writings. I think the book, when I was about 14, I found Crossing the Threshold of Hope, which was an answer to a series of questions that were written by a journalist that he didn't have time to get into the meeting, but he answered them and sent them to him afterwards, and they turned it into a book. And those answers really strengthened me in my faith, because they were the sort of questions that were leveled at me by friends and, you know, people like peers, and they were really good answers to those questions. And I didn't even know that popes wrote books, let alone encyclicals at the time. So it really fed me. The papacy, you know, JP2 really fed me. I was in Venice when he died. I was celebrating. I think it was our 10th wedding anniversary. Would that be right? 20 years ago? It was this time.
Yeah, it was 20 years ago this year.
Yeah. So we were celebrating our 10th wedding anniversary in Venice, and we were thinking, should we get the train down to Rome, you know, to be part of all the funeral and all that sort of thing. And then, of course, we got Benedict XVI elected off the back of that, and that was absolutely golden, because that was when I really started studying the faith properly. And of course, he just felt like he had your back, you know. He was a brilliant theologian. And
I think Mark, I think guys like you and I always have this huge nostalgia for those two men. You know, it was like John Paul II, what's her name? Mother Teresa were like the two living saints of my youth, and that's all I ever heard. And then when Benedict came in, it was like, oh, God's Rottweiler is the Pope. And I find it interesting that, Michael, you kind of were a little more savvy than most Catholics were throughout that period, because I mean, I just have this, like, the way my memory works is John Paul II was this huge conservative, and he was fighting the powers of evil. And it isn't until much later that, especially after the priest scandals, that you start finding out, like, man, he might have known some of this stuff was going on, and maybe, I don't want to ascribe motives to him, but, you know, there was a lot he did do for evangelism. He had some beautiful personal devotions, but there was also a lot of dark stuff under the surface that he just did not contend with as Pope.
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. When I was growing up, now we've talked about my background quite a bit. My grandparents were very involved in fighting the communists here in the United States. They were exposing communist cell networks in Southern California. My grandmother used to keep a list in a little booklet that she had of new bishop appointments, and she would track who they were and where they came from and what they were up to and the things that they said. And she kind of developed a good bishop, bad bishop list. So when John Paul II started appointing certain bishops, I remember her talking to my mother and saying, I don't understand why he would appoint this man, da 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 da. I'm sort of going, that's not good. So, you know, I didn't know what all of that meant at the time, but I would log these things in the back of my head, and it's just, I have a very sharp memory. I remember these things. I remember the conversations. And then as other things would come up, I would go, oh, now suddenly that makes sense. Or suddenly that doesn't really color him in a good perspective. I mean, I remember when he kissed the Quran, which was extremely disturbing to me, because it for all intents and purposes, he may as well have kissed the Satanic Bible. It's just, I don't understand why he would do something like that. At Assisi, they placed a statue of Buddha on top of the tabernacle. Why didn't he remove it? Why didn't he throw it to the ground and smash it? He didn't. Instead, he stood with all of those other interfaith leaders and prayed with them quote unquote, to their own respective deities, which, I mean, that's something that had been condemned by the church in previous decades, previous centuries. You just never did that. So I just kind of logged these things. It's not like I did anything active about it, but I remember going to Christendom College and having people and all my classmates say, "Oh, JP2. And I was like, okay, all right. And they didn't understand why I was so reserved. And I would bring these things up and they'd say, "Oh, why are you so against him?" I'm not.
That must have been a tricky time to be awake to all these things.
Well, it was. I got labeled conspiracy theorist and basically a tinfoil hat wearer. And a friend of mine fairly recently, after they became awake after Pope Francis's papacy and the Obamas and everything else, we met at a reunion at Christendom, and she walked up to me and she said, "I never thought I'd ever say this, but holy crap, you were right."
You're right about everything, Michael. Look, well, the part of the reason I'm even bringing it up is because, so I saw Father Gerald Murray, who I really do like, yesterday on with Joe McLean, and he was, and even Cardinal Dolan gave an interview where they're like, well, what are we going to be looking for in the next pope? And both of them seem to suggest that, we want someone with the clarity of John Paul II and Benedict.
They weren't that clear, though. That's the problem. They weren't. Yeah. They were clear on certain moral issues, but theologically and philosophically, they were not clear. John Paul II was a phenomenologist, which is bizarre. It's alien to the church's thought. And he wrote these philosophical ideas that kind of meandered and didn't really settle on anything. And it left several philosophical thoughts open-ended. That's not a good thing. Benedict was more clear, but we have to remember Benedict also was part of the school of the Nouveau Theologie. He was right there with Hans Urs von Balthasar and Henri de Lubac.
He praised von Balthasar several times.
Yes. And I like a lot of what Benedict did. I loved the man. But his theological writings had some issues. So, I'm not here to judge either of them. I'm not going to say that I'm a better person or a better Catholic than either of them, because I'm not. But I have reservations. I have concerns. I wouldn't want somebody with the clarity of John Paul II or Pope Benedict. I would want somebody with the clarity of Pius X.
Yeah.
The clarity of Leo XIII. The clarity of Pius IX. They didn't have to write volumes of books and 200, 300 page dissertations on any given topic to explain it. What they wrote was on 10 pages, 5 pages, and it was clear, it was concise, and it was thorough. It closed the gap. We don't need long dissertations to explain a simple problem.
Well, I think there's this idea, especially amongst Catholics right now, that if we just get a pope who's willing to speak out against the rainbow movement, if we just get a pope who's willing to speak out on the life issues, and we just get a pope who's willing to speak out on a few, on like just those major issues that all these bishops seem to pay lip service to under the pontificates of JP2 and Benedict. But then as soon as Francis came in, those guys' masks kind of dropped. Like I thought there was a bit of naivete in Father Murray's position, saying that we just want somebody with that kind of like what we're coming up on. I don't think a Benedict XVII or a John Paul III will be sufficient to tackle what we are actually up against in our culture. What do you think, Mark?
I don't think it matters. That's not what the faith is about. The faith isn't about the Pope. Faith is about you and your relationship with Christ and the sacraments, and making sure that your family go to mass and live their lives. That's how you change culture. That's how we change the church, if you like. The Pope's just some bloke in Rome. If he's not holding to the deposit of faith, he's no good to any of us. So, I haven't even really, I haven't listened to Pope Francis. Of course I have, and pored over all his rubbish that he's written and all of that sort of thing, and been absolutely depressed by it. And I have to say, I'm really not of the same opinion with regard to, especially Benedict XVI. And I feel that, I feel you're right that the Pope's not going to save the church by any stretch of the imagination. But I do feel that what we're looking at in terms of trajectory is that everyone who was, except for Michael, of course, but everyone else who was a JP2 Catholic or a Benedict VI Catholic, they're all trads now. The Overton windows moved because we thought that Benedict XVI and JP2 had they had it solid. They were the solid centre. And instead, we've found out now, and that how quickly that all was absolutely, the scales fell from our eyes, didn't they, with Pope Francis, and everything went horribly wrong. So, and I mean, I found myself thinking, how can this happen? Pope Benedict XVI said that his authority ended at the door to his office, and yet Pope Francis seems to be able to do whatever he wants to do. Don't even bother saying mass, let's not bother with it. But the trouble is, because of the media age, we're all so focused on what the Pope's doing to take a lead from it that we're forgetting that that's not really what the Catholic Church is. The Catholic Church is the magisterium of Pius IX. It's not what Francis is doing. It's not that. So,
yeah, no, but there is a the faith is not the Pope. You're 100% right, but the Pope is supposed to confirm confirm the brethren in their faith. So there is, I mean, he plays such a significant part in the Catholic life, so that when you have somebody like Francis come along, it is super discouraging for the average Catholic to just be dealing with the onslaught from the media, and there's no corrections and things like that. But and not just that, but
it's such a mess.
Yeah, but the next,
that's what he did.
The next Pope is going to be he will have full juridical authority over the church to kind of clean up some of the things that are within his authority, which would be, I mean, we saw what Francis did by getting rid of Bishop Strickland, as opposed to getting rid of McElroy. Like McElroy gets elevated and Strickland gets taken out. So, the next Pope, I do wonder what he's going to do with Bishop Strickland, who lost his diocese. It's
nothing. I wouldn't have thought.
Oh man, it's an interesting, hypothetical to play with. But
what one of these guys is gonna? Oh, we're not getting onto that yet, are we? But what one of them is going to stand up for anything? I can't, I just can't see it. I just can't see any of them going, right, we're going to reverse everything. The very best we can hope for is that they let synodality and all that rubbish quietly die and stop going on about it all the time. I think that's the best we can hope for.
So I was going to ask you that. Like, what do you guys think? Do you think the synodal church continues? I don't know. It
depends on who goes in. It really does.
What's going to be interesting about this next conclave is that even like when Francis gets elected, we were all like, oh, he's a South American Jesuit. Like, that can't be good. Where with this conclave, there has been so many interviews and so much media. We're going to know exactly what this next Pope's position is on almost everything, because these guys can't stop blabbing their mouths. So it will be interesting to see who steps out on that loggia. And within 5 minutes, you're going to see Catholics being like, okay, what has he said? What has he said? What has he said?
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out.
I have to tell you a funny story. After Pope Benedict stepped down and there was going to be a conclave, the one that eventually elected Pope Francis, my friends and I played a board game called Conclave. And it was supposed to be this game about, how a conclave works. And each one of you plays a cardinal and you go through the cardinal's career. And then eventually you have this conclave and you vote. And it depends on what kind of influence you have to determine who gets chosen. Well, at the beginning of the game, in order to put together your profile, you draw certain cards that explain where you're from, what your background is, and that kind of thing. Well, I drew South American Jesuit. And this was a month before or like weeks before Francis was elected. I won. I was the least likely to win of our group, but I won. So it was a very funny little, if not a sad determination of.
Well, look, I see everyone talking about Cardinal Sarah, Cardinal Pizzaballa, Cardinal Erdo, but like, what do we do if Tuco Fernandez steps out there?
Well,
go home.
Yeah, it would be a mess. I want to just kind of read you what I wrote this morning on X. I said, a timely reminder: God does not choose the Pope; He confirms the man chosen to become the Pope. Just as any man is free to marry any woman, he should be wise in his choice and choose a woman of virtue. If he does, God seals the marriage and he will enjoy a good life. But if he chooses a woman of vice, he will seal that too, and he will be miserable. We must pray unceasingly that the cardinals choose a virtuous man to become the Pope, so that we may enjoy a period of goodness in the life of the church. If we do not, they may choose someone terrible who will bring dishonor and scandal to the church. For good or for ill, God will seal the choice. And that's kind of where we are right now. The cardinals make the choice. God seals it. And if we get somebody like a Sarah, I think Sarah's too old, but if we get someone like a Sarah, or we get someone like an Erdo or an Ike, God be praised, because he will at least steer the ship back in an orthodox direction. If we get someone like a Fernandez, well, we can then be sure that we are under a chastisement, that God is punishing us, because we know the direction that such an individual is going to steer us. It doesn't mean that we get the power or the ability to determine whether he's the Pope or not, but there are limits on the power of the papacy, on the authority of the papacy, and we don't have to follow those things which he says that are not in conformity with what the church has always taught. So if a Cardinal Fernandez becomes the Pope and he comes out and says, you know what, we're going to go ahead and allow homosexual couples to come into the church. We're going to let them go up and receive blessings. And by the way, they can go up and receive Holy Communion because they're in a committed relationship. And we want to encourage them to participate in the life of the church. We don't have to follow that. In fact, we should stand against it because it goes directly against natural law. It goes against common sense, and it goes against moral law. So even if a wicked Pope were to say such a thing, we're not bound by it. And people like Mike Lewis over at Where Peter is going to sit there and say, oh, that's the teaching of the church. That's the magisterium. No, it's not. No, it's not. Every word uttered by the Pope is not magisterial.
What I think is interesting about this conclave, though, is, okay, so after JP2 and Benedict, I think the cardinals went into the conclave that elected Francis with kind of a naive attitude of, oh, well, no matter who gets elected, you're going to get somebody in that mold. Whereas this conclave, I see even with Cardinal Zen speaking out already about them organizing meetings before he could even get there, that what you're going to see is those cardinals who have Francis fatigue and those cardinals who do want a more orthodox Pope to be elected are going to be way more on their guard. And I think that there will be I don't think they're going to be able to just get whoever they want in this time. I think it could be very contentious, and I think we could have a significant period of interregnum, which is why I think Francis anticipated that and made it so I think this, after a certain amount of votes, it's a simple majority elects the Pope. Like, I think he changed the rules knowing that he caused such a mess that it'll be very difficult to get a 2/3 majority of these cardinals to agree on somebody.
I don't think it's going to be Fernandez, just to put your mind at rest.
Yeah, no, I expect the worst of them.
2 South Americans in. And also the fact that Francis has made such an absolute mess of everything, and Fernandez is part of that mess, insofar as, you know, even with something like Fiducia Supplicans, where he said no further clarifications will be given, immediately issued a clarification. You know, he's just made a clown of himself. Everyone knows that. Everyone who's done a theology degree, you know, knows that. I'd be very, very surprised if anyone was stupid enough to vote for more of the same, you know. And apparently, I mean, this is what I hear from Rome, is that You know, everyone is they're broke. There was a regime of, you know, listening into conversations and a reign of terror. Some people said Francis would swear people out, and, you know, he was a bit of a bully. There must be tremendous relief that all that is over. And I think that they'll be looking for something different. You know, I think Pizzaballa might be your man there.
I don't think there's a chance he's getting in.
He's an Italian, and they'll, you know, they like to bring it back to Italy, don't they, after a period of insanity. And he's also, I think the work that he's done in Jerusalem has been really, when he offered himself, you know, for the hostages, I thought that was very, very bright. So what I'm saying is he's made waves and he's made himself look competent. When he speaks, I mean, Michael Matt had him on his last remnant, and you know, he was saying really Catholic things.
Yeah,
walking along saying, you know, we've got to stand up for Jesus and all this. I was like, wow, that'd be good. Bit of that, please.
Well, there's two ways this goes, in my opinion. It's if you got especially from what you're saying, it does sound like it. If you're right, that would mean a Cardinal Sarah actually does have a good chance. A Cardinal Pizzaballa actually does have a good chance, because maybe these men are like, okay, we need to settle down with all this craziness, right? If that happens, I see it as the world is. So right now we're in a place where you can see it in the media reports, right? Where Francis, the people's pope, the pope who was liberalizing the church and bringing the church in a more progressive direction, and he was blessing same-sex unions and all that stuff. So I think that we've been kind of left alone by the media. They never went after Francis once, not about sex abuse, not about anything. They just laid off of him, and it was like Catholics have had, as much as there's been turmoil about wondering if your mass is going to be taken away, or wondering if Francis is going to lay the hammer down on a good, faithful bishop, there has been a utter tranquility when it comes to real persecution from the world. So if you get a man like a Pizzaballa or a Sarah or a well-known conservative, that will change immediately. And you're going to see the church have, you know, the media and the world will set its sights on the Catholic Church. So the persecution will then come from the outside, which I think will build the body of Christ up. So, you know, I think all of us had always had the idea that if we receive persecution from the world, we're prepared for that, because we expect you're a follower of Christ. You expect the world to hate you. If it hated me, it will hate you. But what none of us were expecting was this persecution from within the church, where it was like our own leaders were trying to demolish the faith on us. So the two routes I see forward are persecution from the world, because we have a faithful pope, or persecution from within the church continues, the revolution continues, and we're going to be getting an onslaught from within the church. So either way, I just see hard times ahead for Catholics. You guys think I'm wrong on that, or?
Well, in terms of persecution from within the church, until the church is cleansed of the modernist errors that have persecuted her for the last 100 years, I think that that's going to continue. Even if we get a good pope, we are going to continue to have persecution of modernists. That's just going to continue to go on. Unless there's a rounding up and a mass execution, mass excommunication.
Oh, that was a Freudian slip. Bring back the Inquisition.
Unless we have something like that going on, that's going to continue. In terms of the world, the close relationship that we have seen between the world and the church over the last 20 years, 30 years, 60 years, actually, is crumbling. We're starting to see that the United States government is drawing a line between the finances and what the church has been doing. People are starting to realize that Catholic Charities was involved in, let's say, illicit transfer of human beings across the border. We're starting to see that the people of the world are rising up against the mass scandals, the child abuse, the homosexual abuse, everything along those lines is being recognized by the world as incongruous with what the church is. So the world at some point is going to throw off the yoke of this we love having a relationship with the church because they give us moral rightness and we give them money. That's not going to happen anymore, regardless of who gets in, because you get a liberal coming in and the world's going to look at that liberal and say, we're not fooled again. We're still not giving you money. In fact, we're going to start shutting down your parishes because you're running a criminal operation. You get a conservative coming in and you're going to get the other part of the world that says, we hate what you represent. You represent oppression of people of sexual diversity, and we're going to start shutting you down because we hate what you're doing. So either way, we are going to be persecuted by the world. It doesn't matter who's Pope.
Okay, now here's another perspective, right? Mm-hmm. We've just seen a massive turnaround in the UK at Easter with people, young men especially, who are disaffected with the culture, looking for answers, and are drawn to the Catholic faith. Our Prime Minister, who was saying that you couldn't say what a woman was or something, I don't know, that women could have penises or something. I don't even know what he was talking about. He's now saying that only women are women, which sounds obvious to us, but there you go. That's how crazy things have been over here. But I think that we can't go on with the madness that we're seeing in our culture, and that the Catholic, the three of us, everyone watching, we believe that this is the truth. And I think that it's persuasive. The truth is persuasive. And people can only put up with the madness and insanity that they're being told is normality by secular culture for so long. And that, if we can just hold on to the truth as past the deposit of faith, as given to us by Jesus and the apostles, if we can only maintain the goodness, the truth and the beauty, I think we'll start seeing a turnaround. I think we'll start seeing that's what it feels like at Easter, even in our parish. I said to my parish priest, have you he said, I can't believe how many confessions and how many people there've been at Mass. And, people are coming. And like my next door neighbour came to Mass on Easter Sunday and he went, oh, that was really, really ancient, felt really like it was something important and mystical going on. Yes, that's what
There's definitely something happening with God stirring the hearts of people, right? They've been fed this nonsense from the culture for so long, and it's so empty. And I think even like the new atheist movement that came up years back, people saw, okay, you get rid of God and other gods come up, right? Like you can't just get rid of God because these other gods pop up, and then all of a sudden you start seeing these insane things happening all over the culture. So I think God is definitely working with the insanity to draw people to him.
And that's what Chesterton said, wasn't it? Like it's not that people won't believe in anything, it's that they believe in anything.
They'll believe in anything.
And that's what we saw. That's what we've seen.
Have you ever seen a tree with root rot? Do you know what root rot is?
Yeah.
Okay. So root rot comes from an abundance of water. In other words, if a tree is in standing water or in a wet area for a long, long time, mold starts to grow on the roots of the tree and it starts to rot, and it rots on the outside of the roots, but it'll eventually kill the tree. The only way to treat it is to dry the tree out as much as possible without killing it. And I think that the church back in the 60s was undergoing a deluge, like just full of water. The roots were rich. They were, excuse me, pulling in all kinds of nutrients, but there was a mold that was growing on it. And we have been experiencing that rot for the last 60 years. But to treat it, we had to go through a period of dryness. And I think that the last 12 years has been a period of dryness. The rot has been exposed now. And what's interesting is that when you dry out the roots, they become combustible. It's easy to light them on fire. And I think that that fire is what we're looking for at this moment. We want that fire. We want that passion to enter into the church and to shock the roots so that they suck up the nutrients and the moisture and revive the tree. I think that we're seeing that kind of thing happen now, especially with the youth movement in the UK. And we're seeing it in the United States as well. So again, this all goes back to the question of the purpose of the church. The church exists for the salvation of souls. She is only interested in salvation. That's it. She's not interested in climate change. She's not interested in coddling homosexuals and their relationships. She's interested in the salvation of souls. And if you have a pope who is not interested in the salvation of souls, but is looking to sanctify the world, well, she's going to spit him out eventually. And again, I think to Mark's point, it doesn't really matter who is the pope, because as long as you know and understand the faith and you promulgate the faith and you look to spread the faith as much as humanly possible, that's where the church is going to be, regardless of who's sitting at the top.
Well said. And it's been, look, we've had 12 years, right? And we're seeing all this growth. But like, the church is alive. If we believe that, that this is Christ's church, and God is doing something. And I think if you look, what our job almost is to see what God is doing, what God is using, what he has used Pope Francis for. And I think if you look online now, you've got loads of lay people like us fulfilling Fulton Sheen's prophecy, coming online and telling people what the faith is. And the priests don't even know what's going on.
Yeah.
They don't need to, because what's their job? To give the sacraments, to say the mass. You know, that's what their job is. It's not really, it's our job to evangelize the culture. And here we are doing it, and it's having an effect. And that Francis has brought that about by trashing the faith for 12 years, really, hasn't he?
Well, I think I see that as one of the, like, God writing straight with crooked lines. It's, you know, as much as the powers that be were trying to destroy our foundation of doctrine, things like that, what winds up happening is people that take their faith seriously dig in even deeper, and they want to learn more about it. And it's you know, people saw his papacy as apocalyptic. They were like, what is going on here? And they started studying and going deeper into all of it. So as much as Satan is trying to destroy the church, God will always use evil for good. Do either of you see schism on the horizon? Because I kind of think there's going to be one. Whether it's no matter who the Pope is next, I see, because to me, there's two different churches under the same edifice at the moment. There's you know, one set of people who believe one thing. I mean, there's probably even more than one schism, to be honest. But I think, especially if you get a conservative Pope, there's going to be a schism. All these people who thought the Francis Revolution was the pinnacle and it was going to just go on forever, if that suddenly does a 180, I don't know how that how the people who thought that stay within the confines of the church.
Mark?
Well, I don't know. I think there is an existential schism, as you say. Like, the Germans are in full schism. You know, we just haven't we haven't acknowledged it. So I think that's existed my whole life. That's been the case. And I'd say 80% at least of the people who go to my church don't know, or, you know, I mean, if you look at I mean, obviously I'm getting UK TV here, but if you look at the interviews outside Westminster Cathedral about Pope Francis, none of them got a clue. No one's got a clue what's going on. Most people aren't engaged with their faith. You know, I think more and more people are waking up to it. But so, you know, what different? I don't see that it will make any difference. The church is the church, and it always will be. But, you know, maybe if you get a more conservative Pope, I mean, what are they going to do? You're not going to get, who's the one who looks like Daddy Pig? Marx, you know, in Germany. You're not going to get him walking out of his massive palace, are you?
Yeah.
He's not going to go, oh, add the keys back, boys, I'm off. You know, I'll go and live in a shed somewhere and preach heresy. You know, all they're trying to do is get their money back by following the secular narrative. That's all they're trying to do. They don't care about the faith or about the people or about anything. They've got no vocations. None of these people have got any vocations. It's sterile. So that I'm afraid that project is dead in the water. It doesn't, you know, we look at, I can't help but feel we're talking about this and we look at things in such a, you know, a microcosmic way. It's just in our lifetimes, don't we? You know, 3 school years and 10 or whatever. And that's the way that we're judging all of this. But the church works in centuries, and it takes a long while for these things to work through. But if you've got the eyes to see, you can see God doing amazing things with all of this stuff. And it's like we're rebellious children. I always go back to Genesis. It's like the Genesis story, and you can see, you know, every generation does it in some respects. And You know, everyone's going, well, we know better. We know better than the church. We're going to have gay blessings. We're going to have, oh, that was rubbish. We know better now. Not in 2025. We're going to do it all different. And it'll all collapse and it'll all be destroyed, and the church will build it up again, because that's what the purpose of the church is. That's the history, the timeline of scripture. That's the way all these things have always worked, you know. That if we are faithful, we see through that. We stand on the shoulders of the saints and the fathers, and we learn those lessons, and we stay close to Jesus. And that's, you know, what we need to do. And that's the message really that we need to put out there, isn't it?
So with regard to the question of schism, I think we have to define our terms. The nature of schism is to say that I refuse to be in communion with that person. That's the nature of schism. So one who is in schism against the Pope says, I refuse to be in communion with the Pope. He is not my head. He is not telling me what to do. I'm not going to be under him. That would be schism. Or you have schism of the lateral sense, which is, I refuse to be in communion with Mark Lambert and his family. We're not part of the same church. I refuse to be in communion with him. So that would be a lateral schism, where you're making a distinct cut. I am not a part of this. I'm taking my own authority to excise them from the church. But I don't think what we're facing is schism. I think the word schism gets tossed about because people think there's going to be a split. But schism does not necessarily mean I'm not going to be a part of this, or I don't want them to be a part of what I'm with. What we're looking at more is really a moral and theological heresy. And I think that what we're going to see is, at some point, there will be a defined heresy, and there will be a kind of an inquisition that points out, okay, the homosexual heresy, the transgender movement heresy, the revolt against Humani Vitae heresy, and all of these things that go directly against the moral underpinnings of the church. And then you're going to have the theological heresies, where modernism, which is already a defined heresy but is hard to pin down, will be codified. And anybody adhering to certain ideologies regarding the modernist heresy is going to be so codified that they will be easy to identify. And the split will take place on those grounds. It'll be a matter of heresy, and anybody who refuses to acquiesce to what the church says with regard to these moral and theological issues will be deemed to be heretics, and they'll be removed from the church by the very nature of what they profess to believe. So the split is a theological and moral one. It's not not a matter of whether we want to be unified. It's a totally different animal.
Isn't that like a latente sentia excommunication?
But it's going to have to be more explicit.
It's going to have to be. But at the moment, you've got Catholics who believe that abortion is okay. Loads of them. Loads who contracept. Loads who, you know, and that I think the problem, like in the past, when we had a problem like that come up, we had a council, you know, or a synod, and that's what Pope Francis should have been doing over the last 12 years. He's saying, no, instead he gave us transgenderism is a massive problem. Yeah. And like, let's deal with that. Let's get all the brains together. What's the church's response to this massive challenge to, you know, reality? But instead he's wandered off in all these different useless directions. And it'll be really, I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see how that is dealt with, because that's what we're desperate for. I know from teaching young people, you know, from being involved in catechesis with teenagers and stuff, that the biggest question for most young people surrounds homosexuality and our culture's not just acceptance but promotion of homosexuality, which I think in historical and, you know, perhaps philosophical terms is a sign of the decay and end of society. You know, historically speaking, this is a sort of a pattern that you see repeated, and we've failed to address that. We've completely failed to address that. The last thing that the church issued was the letter on the pastoral care of homosexual persons in 89? Yeah, that the CDF wrote. You know, it desperately needs an update.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a good place to jump over to locals, because what I would like to do is talk to you guys about the apocalypse and the end times, and whether what we're seeing might be something more apocalyptic. So I don't like doing that on this end because people say I'm a black pillar and things like that. But if you guys want, we're going to go over to locals now. If you guys are not local subscribers, it's the best way to support the show. And we're going to get into, because I kind of see the things that are happening right now as maybe a little more significant than just, oh, we're getting a good pope or a bad pope. I kind of see things as heating up and a climax to the story. So I'd like to get you guys, both of your take on that, because especially what Mark just said about the decaying culture and the end of Christendom, because very clearly Christendom is over. There is not really a Christian culture left. So what role does the church going forward play as society continues to crumble? So Mark Lambert, you are over at Catholic Unscripted. If you guys are not subscribed to Catholic Unscripted, I am going to be interviewing Catherine Bennett at 1 p.m. today, who is also on with Mark and Gavin Ashenden over on Catholic Unscripted. Michael Hitchborn at the Lepanto Institute. If you guys are not subscribed to Michael, head over there and also subscribe and get Michael's newsletter. And we are going to continue this conversation on the other side. I'm just going to cut you guys from YouTube off right about now. Let's see.